Working as a PhotoPass photographer at Disney during the Christmas holidays was kind of a mix of the best of times and the worst of times. Here's some of the good, the bad, and a little bit of the ugly of working at Disney during Christmas. The Christmas holidays at Walt Disney World were the busiest time of the year. They would start in November, but those 2 weeks around Christmas itself would be absolutely insane. And they made for some of the best and worst of times working at the park. You'd have all the holiday cheer and the decorations and the huge crowds and the mess that kind of came along with them. And it made working during that time very interesting, to say the least. The hardest part of all of it was the crowds. And I've talked about this on other videos. You would have days where Disney would begin to actually close the park gates because they were reaching close to capacity. And there are different levels that Disney uses as far as different types of closures. If the park is starting to reach a certain level, then they would actually close it off to anybody who just has regular one-day tickets and still allow anybody who's staying at the Disney resorts or who has passes or who has dining reservations in the park. And they gradually begin to reduce access as the park gets more and more crowded. So there will be a point where they will begin to cut off people who are staying at the resorts and only allowing in people with reservations and cutting off people with passes up to a point where they will actually just plain close the gates. And when I was working there between 2006 and 2011, there were a few times when they actually just plain closed the gates and nobody else was getting in. You knew it was insanely busy at that point. It would make things very interesting. If you're working with the characters, it didn't make that much of a difference to you because you were typically in an indoor location and the line was kind of regulated. It had a queue area. And not a big deal, you just kind of kept doing what you would normally do. But if you were out on the streets, say Main Street at Magic Kingdom, or Hollywood Boulevard over at Hollywood Studios, or in front of Spaceship Earth, or those kinds of places, it could be so packed, busy, it could almost be scary. You're out there trying to take pictures of people in front of, say, the castle or Spaceship Earth, but you were trying also not to get run over, and the crowds would be so thick that you would literally be shoulder to shoulder. There wasn't room to maneuver. You're trying to get people to pose for pictures, and so you would have this family in front of you, but you're also trying to make sure there's not enough space for other people to get in between, because if there is, they will, and you're not going to be able to get the picture. So if you're up near the train station, typically you need a good amount of space between you and the family you're shooting, and you can't do that during Christmas because there's just not room. You'll never get the picture because everybody else will crowd in between. It made strollers and electric scooters very dangerous for both people around them and people on them. I learned my very first Christmas holiday weekend when it was just packed busy that I needed to add extra padding around my ankles and my shins because I actually came home with them bleeding from getting hit so many times because there's no room to maneuver. People can't just turn those carts around and they can't just jump out of the way. And so you get hit and hit and hit over and over again because there's no place for them to go. Your shoulders also end up getting bruised because so many people walking end up shoulder blocking you and trying to get by. And I would come home sometimes with these big old bruises. Not serious ones, but I mean, you could tell that I had red marks and everything because I'd been blocked and hit so many times. It made it interesting trying to protect the camera gear because you're holding on to it when you're not shooting, and even when you are, you're keeping hands on that stuff so it doesn't get hit by somebody else and damaged or broken. There was a lot of self-defense mechanisms in place while you're working during the Christmas season. And that immense type of crowd really affected the moods. You had a lot of people that were just plain happy to be there, and there wasn't anything that was going to kill their Christmas spirit. It's Christmas time and they're at Disney. But then you also had a lot of people who were very frustrated, aggravated, irritable, which I totally get. If I'm in thick crowds for a long period of time, I start getting irritable myself. And then they realize they're having to wait 30 minutes to get to a bathroom and an hour to get a snack. And, you know, any of the rides they want to go on, if they don't have fast passes, it's not going to happen. People just start to get very frustrated with it, especially if they're the ones that were planning and hadn't looked ahead of time and done any checking things out and thought that the parks would be empty because, nobody goes out of town at Christmas. Surprise! Everybody's here. And they would be the ones that would really get frustrated because they were thinking this would be a perfect time that nobody would be there. And it's just ugly mob scene. What made it interesting as a photographer is when the family you were shooting had a mix of those two kinds of people. You had the people that were super excited to be there and they're happy. And then you could kind of see the trip planners that are staying there going, okay, it's a photo. You got to smile. You got to look like you're happy. It'll be okay. You can manage to work this out. You may not get all the rides, but there's other things you can do. And sometimes with some of those people, it would just get too much and they'd pop and they'd have to vent and scream and yell. And sometimes, because we were the ones that were very convenient, we were the ones that got it. And a lot of times then it was just kind of, listening and letting them vent and steam a little bit. But it could be a frustrating time for a lot of guests. And the Christmas spirit didn't always win over. It was, think like Black Friday shopping, except it's all day long, every day for a week. That's kind of what you got. Without the bargains. Because people at Disney don't pay attention and they're not aware of what's around them and what they're doing and where they're going and what's happening. It did become very easy for people to get hurt, to trip over a sidewalk because they couldn't even see the step because there were so many people, and just have all sorts of things like that. So you had to be very careful with the guests, with the people around. Watch out for them, watch out for yourself. It was not always fun, especially when you were doing it as part of a long day every day. Cast members during the Christmas holidays rarely get days off. You might get your normal scheduled day off, but you might not because of the extended hours and the extreme crowds. And in fact, if you hadn't put in for vacation day months in advance and had seniority, you probably weren't getting it. The parks had extended hours, which would mean you could be starting work as a photographer at 5 or 6 in the morning and being there until 2 a.m. You wouldn't be there that whole stretch, but you might get the opening shift that early, or you might get the closing shift that late, and you could be working anywhere from 10 to 14 hours, depending upon what was going on that day. I actually had a couple days during Christmas that I would work 16, 18 hours. Long days. They get shorthanded, they need some help, you end up picking up because they need you, and yeah, you're there for a long time. And you measure that out over the week, and I had a couple Christmas weeks where I worked 60 and 70 hours during that week. It was nuts. It was a great paycheck afterwards, but it wasn't fun during the holiday week. And it made juggling hours to be home with the family interesting as well. Because you want to be home with your kids, but you've got a job that's demanding. While it's definitely not the same as people who work for the police and fire and our military, it gives you a little bit of an inkling in how do you juggle, and do the kids have to get up at 4 in the morning to open up presents, or are they going to have to wait until 7 o'clock at night? Or maybe do it a different day, because if Dad's doing 16 hours on Christmas Day, Dad ain't going to be awake or in any mood to be there for opening presents. Just not going to happen. And we were blessed that for the most part my schedules really worked around where we could still do Christmas on Christmas Day, but that wasn't true for everybody. It also meant that there were times, in particular during Christmas, where you would get a long 12, 14-hour day, close up at 2 in the morning, and then you'd be starting again at 10 a.m. in not a lot of time, and you're tired, and you've got to get all the way through security and out to your car and then home, and then do it again in the morning, and that could take 45 minutes to an hour to do all that. And when you're working hours like that, man, you need some sleep. That was the time of the year when I would occasionally just bunk out and sleep at the Magic Kingdom or at Epcot and just plain stay the night because I needed the sleep. Some of the break rooms had couches, and so you may claim a couch and sleep there. But those were the couple times that I slept over at the parks in the employee break areas and got a semi-decent night's sleep. Because we worked with entertainment and the characters, we knew where the showers were, so I could stay overnight, take a quick shower in the morning, have a fresh outfit and costume ready to go the next day, and I just plain stayed at Disney. I didn't even go home. Thankfully, I only had to do that 3 times, I think, but it made for some very long days. What was interesting, though, is how many people think that you get freebies and extra specials and all sorts of stuff like that you really don't. Disney was wonderful in that they did send out kind of a Christmas bonus package that would include some extra admissions for your family to the parks and a free PhotoPass and some very nice discounts for some of the dining of 30 to 50% off, and then some free snacks and popcorn and drinks and some various things like that. So it was a nice little bonus that you would get in November to last all the way through the holidays. You didn't get some of the extras that you might think. There's a rumor that the cast members get free pins for working on the holidays. They might at Disneyland, but not at Walt Disney World. We didn't get free pins. Now, our Cast Connection store, or Company D, would have some holiday pins for sale, and you could go to those backstage, but you had to buy them. They didn't give them to you. We would sort of get kind of a Christmas gift. My first Christmas there, we got a very nice little Snow White dish that was really pretty, and I gave that to my wife. Apparently the year or two before I started, they actually had given out watches at some point, but that wasn't what I saw. We had one Christmas where we got a little ornament that was made out of recycled materials, and I'm sorry, it looked cheap. I stuck it on my wreath, and it still actually hangs on the wreath today. But after that, it got even cheaper, to the point where this was our quote-unquote Christmas gift. It's a rather inexpensive ornament that you could hang on your tree, and that was it. Woohoo! And you're kind of like, well, that's nice, but maybe it was because there was 50,000 cast members they had to worry about, but they didn't spend a whole lot on what they were going to give us. And even that wasn't necessarily a guarantee that I was going to get it, because I wasn't always on full-time. Your full-time cast members would get those gifts first, and then your part-time ones would also get them. But my last year and a half at Disney, I was technically on seasonal status. While I was scheduled part-time, and then I would pick up extra shifts, so I would work nearly full-time hours, and especially during Christmas, I would still work the overtime. Because I was technically seasonal, I wasn't necessarily entitled to one of the gifts unless they had extras and leftovers. Then I could get one. Because I knew the managers, didn't have any problem getting one, but it still kind of lets you know that, hey, we'll be happy to work you to death, but we're not going to give you the one little perk. The other thing that people would ask me about is, well, you'd get free meals at least, right? Nope. There were some times, occasionally, when the Disney cafeterias, which were run by another company, would actually have a discounted meal. Like for Thanksgiving, they would give you a Thanksgiving dinner with the turkey and gravy and stuffing, but they would still charge you for it. It was typically marked down, so you would have a cheaper meal just for the holidays, maybe. But then you actually had to be able to get over to the cafeteria and wait in a long line to get it and check out and have time to eat. And most of the time, it was a 10 to 15 minute walk to get there if you weren't working right near it. And then you have a 30-minute break, and you'd spend 10 minutes walking there and 10 minutes walking back. That left you 10 minutes to try to get the food and sit down and eat it. That wasn't going to work. So we really didn't eat at the cafeterias very often on holidays. Now, PhotoPass, as the photographers and the managers, we would get together and we would kind of do a little potluck at our base where we would check in and out. So we would have some food there and snacks and desserts and, usually a couple nice meals provided by the managers. But that was because we decided to do that ourselves as a group, not because Disney was doing it for us. So not really any freebies that way beyond the one little gift, and it's debatable over how nice a freebie that was. But what did make it really nice, even with the negatives and the long hours and the sleepless nights and the crowds and everything else, was just how pretty the parks were. They were absolutely gorgeous at Christmas. The lights on the castle, the lights and the displays all around the World Showcase, the Osborne lights over at Hollywood Studios, which those made for some interesting moments as well. When you were shooting those, which I got to do a number of times, you had to shoot when all the lights were on and not dancing. The lights would actually sync up with the music and they would flash and blink, and if you're trying to take pictures of people with the lights when they're doing that, invariably you ended up with these times where you'd only have like a third of the lights on and it looked splotchy and not good. Or you'd have the lights all dimmed, and so you'd have these people standing there with black behind them. So you ended up not really shooting pictures when the lights were dancing, because you couldn't get a good picture. So you'd wait for about 5 minutes while the music played, and then you'd have 5 to 10 minutes to try to shoot families like crazy, and then you'd have to wait again while they danced one more time. So you would have families that would be waiting 30 or 40 minutes to get their pictures in the lights, and they were great pictures when they came out, but it was kind of tough to get sometimes. In fact, it was hard enough for the PhotoPass photographers that I actually had one time, I just took in my own tripod, my own camera, and I took them that way because it was going to be so hard for those poor PhotoPass people to do it with the long crowd. It's like, I can just do it myself. The other issue with the Osborne lights is they had snow, which was actually big soap bubbles that came off the buildings, which looked cool and it was fun, but it's not good for camera equipment. So we had to make sure that we had really our rain gear, and we would take the hoods and we would cover our cameras. Or we eventually got pouches and actual water gear that we got to keep them in. But it made for kind of a mess if all that stuff was landing on the camera and soaking in. And pretty early on, we had one guy that didn't have anything to cover his camera, and the soap stuff all got on that camera, and it just ruined the camera and the lens. And so you were having to watch that as well. And when it snowed, I mean, out came the hoods and, you know, the vinyl covers, and get those things covered and protected so it didn't ruin the gear. But they were gorgeous pictures and so much fun to be able to shoot. So that's kind of a little look at what it was like to work at Disney during Christmas as a PhotoPass photographer. Did you get to work at a theme park during Christmas? I'd love to hear your stories. What was great? What was bad? I'd love to hear your feedback and stories in the comments. So please share them below. Don't forget to hit like and share the video. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button and that bell so you know when I've got new videos. If you want to know about my fan page, my merchandise, the equipment I use, where you can contact me, email, address, all of that kind of stuff and more, check the description. There's a ton of info there. Thank you as well to my patrons. Your financial support is incredible, and I so appreciate it. If you want to know more about Patreon and supporting me, be sure to check that link in the description as well. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. God bless. The Christmas holidays at Walt Disney World. Okay, it's a poto. It's a poto? What's a poto? Poto. If you want to know whenever I have a new video out, well, hey, make sure you hit that button right there and subscribe. If you want to see another video right now, well, I've got a great one right here for you. And if you want to be like these wonderful people here and help support me financially on Patreon, well, check out that link right there and it'll take you to it. Thanks so much, and God bless.